If I could ask everyone to have a seat, we'd like to resume where we left off now that we've had a chance to catch our breaths. I'd like to once again remind the board that when you have something to say on the record, please push your microphone button so it can be picked up, and then push it when you're finished because we only have a limited number of active mics. And we are still audio and video streaming. So with that, I will turn it over to Chairman Dillard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will call this Madam Secretary. That's right. Although you're sometimes the chairman.
No.
I'll call this board meeting of the Regional Transportation Authority to order. And with that, let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance, as always. Director Durante, why don't you lead us? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Madam Secretary, now that I have your roll proper, will you call our roll?
Certainly. Director Anderson?
Here.
Director Buchanan?
Here.
With the necessary paperwork completed. Director Colson? Here. Director DeWitt?
Here.
Director Durante?
Here.
Director Frega? Director Fuentes?
Here.
Director Higgins?
Here.
Director Hobson?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director McGallis?
Here.
Director Melvin?
Here.
Director Pang?
Here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Troiani?
Here.
Chairman Dillard?
Here.
We have a quorum of 16 present. Simple math. 15 present with one on the phone and one absent.
Great. Thank you, Madam Secretary. As many of you may know, the City Council in Chicago will be voting to reappoint Phil Fuentes and Sarah Pang to the RTA board early next month. However, they will also be voting on Jim Buchanan's replacement, as Jim has chosen to retire at the end of his current term. So this, while he's on the phone, Jim, this is your last meeting, and we are very, very, very sad to see you go. And while we're glad to have Sarah and Phil stay on board, Jim will provide a hole that we will miss very, very much. His counsel, his expertise as a labor leader in the state of Illinois, and he's been a great member for what is surprisingly how time flies, Director Buchanan, 10 years. But you have really been someone that I've looked up to, and we're going to really miss you. So, Director Buchanan, you want to say anything? And you're always welcome to come back, sir. And you know the Chicagoland area as well as anyone I've ever met. So never be shy to reach out to your successor or any of us, Jim. But we're going to miss you.
I'd just like to say thank you. And with that being said, Chicago is a first-class city that deserves first-class transportation. And I believe Chairman Dillard, the directors, the RTA employees make a tremendous team. And I'm looking forward to the future for our constituents that live in our territory that the RTA serves. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and we're going to really miss you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on is item 3A, and that's the approval of the minutes from our meeting, which was on June 22nd, 2017. Any questions or comments? Can I have a motion and a second on the adoption? Sarah Pang moves that we adopt the minutes from June 22nd, seconded by Director J.D. Ross. And Audrey, why don't you take a roll call on that so we have a baseline roll call if we can.
All righty. Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Buchanan?
Yes.
Director Colson? Yes. Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Durante?
Yes.
Director Fuentes?
Yes.
Director Higgins?
Yes.
Director Hobson?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Troiani?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
15 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Next is the public comment segment of the meeting. and we do not have a speaker scheduled for today. So we'll move on to item 5, which is Executive Director Leanne Redden's report to the board. Leanne?
Good morning, everyone. I'll try to go through fairly quickly because some of the stuff we have kind of touched on in other conversations in the Finance Committee. So as I always say, we begin where we always begin. Through the end of July, the state owes the RTA $509.5 million. The state is was about 13 months behind, which is the equivalent of 11 and a half months behind on PTF. On August 7th, to the point about is money starting to flow and how's our cash flow situation looking. On August 7th, the RTA received a $37.1 million payment of PTF, bringing down the amount owed to $472.4 million. The year-to-date cost, though, of carrying that debt in terms of debt service is $2.6 million just for this, covering this short-term debt. So looking to Springfield, in July, the General Assembly, I will say mostly ended its 2-year-long budget impasse, as there's still a few loose ends to be tied up, including the ongoing negotiations regarding school funding. But a budget agreement was passed that appropriated $36.3 billion in general revenue funds for fiscal year 2018. It included $5 billion in new revenue created partly through an increase in the state income tax to 4.95% for individuals and 7% for corporations. The agreement also contained approximately $2.5 billion in spending cuts from previous fiscal years, including 5% spending cut across the board to most state agencies. The budget agreement also made cuts to state funding for local governments, and the RTA is one such organization, and we've discussed that sort of at length earlier today. While not as severe as some of the cuts contemplated by earlier bills considered by the General Assembly, these cuts included, as we already just touched on earlier, the 2% surcharge in the collection of the RTA sales tax, which is collected by the department and distributed to us via the Department of Revenue. The 2% surcharge was added to a number of other local taxes collected by the state. So we weren't the only ones hit. So I guess there's some misery loves company or safety in numbers, whatever phrase you want to tag to that. The surcharge will reduce the RTA sales tax receipts by about $12 million in 2017 and $24 million in subsequent years. A 10% cut to PTF for fiscal year 2018 was also included within the approved budget. This temporary, and I sort of put it in quotes, reduction is expected to lower the PTF receipts by about $10 million for 2017 and $30 million in 2018, and we've captured all that in the previous couple of items at the board, at the Finance Committee. Although the budget agreement did include cuts to the region, there were also some positive results for the RTA included within this agreement. The budget agreement also included a provision that mandates a direct deposit into the Public Transportation Fund on the monthly basis in the amount of the money necessary to match the RTA sales tax of 30%, that PTF match. So this provision mandates that the Illinois Department of Revenue bypass the General Revenue Fund and send the monthly payments directly to the Transportation Fund upon collection of that revenue. This new transfer of funds, and we've already started to see some preliminary evidence of this, should result in more timely PTF payments being made to the RTA. So while it's not addressing our backlog, it is alleviating that sort of very immediate cash flow crisis, which I call it a crisis, as to where we were talking about at our last board meeting here. Similarly, a portion of the RTA's state funding will now be paid out of the road fund. Previously, nearly all of RTA's state funding came from the General Revenue Fund. So again, a little bit more stability in terms of how the availability of funds and them flowing to us. This should help alleviate those cash flows as the money is being transferred on a more timely basis. On June 28th, the General Assembly sent a House Bill 3004 to the Governor's desk. This is the bill reauthorizing the RTA's short-term borrowing authority for another 2 years, as well as adding the authority to the borrowing to allow us to utilize a line of credit as one of the borrowing tools, a cheaper borrowing tool. The governor has 60 days to take action on that bill. If the governor does not sign or veto the bill, in other words, not take any action after 60 days or within that 60-day window, after that 60 days, the bill will become law automatically. As of today, no action has been taken. The 60-day window ends at the end of this week. So we continue to work with the administration on seeking passage of signing of that bill. So moving on to DC, both the Senate and the House are on their August breaks. The administration is mostly focused on infrastructure bill, but most of its time, although, has been taken up with the Affordable Care Act, repeal replacement, preliminary discussions on tax reform. So that's sort of taking the air out of really a lot of advancement on the infrastructure bill. Top priorities of those two issues: raising the debt ceiling and finishing the fiscal year 2018 spending bills. The FAA reauthorization have taken up most of the White House and Congress's capacity of late. It's highly likely that the administration and Republicans in Congress could turn to an infrastructure bill though, to get sort of a legislative victory, if you will, as they head into the 2018 midterm elections. So we are still holding out some possible hope. So, changing topics completely. Twice a year, I think most of you recall that we come to the board with a project management oversight report on the capital projects across the region in our ongoing efforts to share that information, be more transparent, etc., etc. We're happy to report that this updated information is now available on the RTA's RTAMS website. It includes project descriptions, status, funding, recent pictures, maps, and related jurisdictions. We will be updating that project information on an ongoing basis. We had been relying sort of on consultant support in a lot of that. We do have some consultant support, but we are doing a lot more of this in-house and posting it through in-house resources. The RTA is required to oversee the Service Board's capital programs and expenditures to ensure that funds are spent efficiently and effectively, and this helps us in that effort. To access the PMO projects, you can go to www.rtams.rtams.org and select any of the capital projects you're interested in, and then you can actually look specifically at the Project Management Oversight Program. Oh, sorry, just delayed there. The RTA celebrated the 27th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act last month. We participated in the State of Illinois DHS Resource Fair held at the State of Illinois building on July 20. We were also a gold level sponsor of this year's 14th annual Disability Pride Parade in downtown Chicago on the 22nd. RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE staff were on hand to provide information about the region's accessible transit programs. CTA and PACE were also on site with buses, assisting riders with practicing boarding and alighting buses, using wheelchair securements and other accessibility features in our region's fixed route system. We also published a series of blog posts, including one by Commissioner Karen Tamley of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. It was a great post, and I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't already. As you know, the RTA works a great deal with riders with disabilities and older adults, and so we were proud to mark that 27th anniversary of the passage of the ADA in this way. And finally, Chairman Dillard was asked to be one of several local transit leaders to give welcoming remarks at the American Public Transportation Association board member conference held here in Chicago last month. He focused on how transit plays a significant role in creating jobs and improving the quality of life while bringing much needed attention to sufficiently funding our regional system. The event was part of a weekend of seminars during which policymakers across the country came together to focus on best practices in governance and creating policy for public transportation system. You can also see Dorval Carter, who was also one of the key speakers at that event as well. With that, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Director Redden. Does anybody have any questions of Leanne? If not, moving on is our update on the activities of the RTA Transit Access Citizens Advisory Board. And Greg, step right up as always, and it's great to have you here.
Yeah. You guys were so lively today.
Big agenda, a heavy one.
Anyway, good morning, Chairman Dillard, directors, RTA staff, and public. I'm here to give you an overview of our meeting that we had on July 17th. It was our third quarterly meeting. First of all, we had Bill Lackman come in and talk to us about the budget funding and allocation process. He also gave an overview of the history on how transportation is funded and discuss the changes that were made because of the 2008 legislation for funding reform legislation. One of the things that happened during this section, and there were two things that you guys were talking about today, there were questions and some inquiries on how does online shopping and so forth impact sales tax, and what sorts of strategic ways has RTA come up with to try and capture those dollars. So I was glad to hear Chairman Dillard talk about that he wanted that looked into, because we were curious too. We also, another item you're talking about were costs and lack of ridership and stuff. One of the members during the budget talk was talking about the low ridership. He's on the cab committee in the metropolitan down on the south side. And he was saying that there's low ridership on the Lakeshore electric line. And he was suggesting and asked if I'd bring it before you guys and whoever else needs to hear it, if there's some way to develop some kind of integrated fare schedule so that it would increase ridership from the bus to using the train and so forth.
Give the deed to the CTA.
Describing that in great detail is beyond me, because I'm not a transportation person, but he said that a lot of people didn't ride because of the multiple fare structures. Then we went on to our next item, which was the Eligibility Review Board. Daphne Foster gave us an overview, an update on that. The board is in place now. They went through a number of applications. They have 5 community members, 3 of which are new and 2 new members, and they also have 2 alternates that are from the mayor's office of people with disabilities. The individuals have all gone through training on policies and procedures, and they've also shadowed at hearings in April and in June. So they're up and ready to go, and so that they can take care of any backlog and make sure that RTA meets the statutory regulations. The next item that we talked about, we had a presentation of Ride-in Cane. Lynn O'Shea, who is the vice chair of our advisory board, she works for Kane County. She gave us an overview. Ride-in Kane was created in 2008 as a curb-to-curb service using small vehicles and buses. It's a non-fixed route, on-demand response paratransit service. The service provides services to seniors, people with disabilities, and low-income individuals. And these individuals' eligibility is determined by a sponsoring agent. The sponsoring agents are participants that make these determinations are municipalities, townships, not-for-profits, and pace. Since there are so many entities involved, and to provide the minimum confusion as far as logistically setting up rides, they have a central call center to provide rides. The rides are 24-hour. You can get a ride for over a 24-hour period, 7 days a week. They have a 3-tiered pay system. It's $4 for the first 10 miles and $1.50 after. For each additional mile, there's a $4 flat fee, and there's free rides. This depends upon, the level of one's eligibility and sponsorship. As of 2016, Ride in Cane has provided rides for over 89,000 individuals. They do receive some JARC funding and $5310 for federal money, but they would like to increase their sponsorship agents so that they have a more sustainable funding source instead of relying completely, relying on federal dollars. One of the members of the committee, because we've taken a look at Ride in Cane, and we've also had a presentation on Ride McHenry, and they asked, that maybe it would be interesting to have a study done to see what these particular different models, if they're more cost effective and more efficient, even though they don't meet the same standards at ADA, paratransit, but is it a system that should be studied and possibly expanded? Our next meeting is October 17th. Real interesting. Every one of our meetings has been on the 17th. And I didn't use that number when I paid the lottery last night. But anyway, that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Greg, as always. Any questions for Mr. Pullman? Thank you, and we probably are going to engage you as we advocate to try to get some of our paratransit monies back. So thank you, as always. We'll be back in touch, but
Okay.
we appreciate you
Thank you.
coming in all the time. Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Next is item 7, and that's the approval of the consent items as they appear on the board agenda. And these include 7A, which was the ordinance for enhanced mobility for seniors and individuals with disability program of projects presented what seemed like hours ago by Heather. 7B, the resolution certifying the financial results for the second quarter in 2017, the ordinance adopting forecasting for the 2017 funding allocations. 7D is the ordinance establishing the estimates for the amounts available to the service boards for 2018 through 2020 operating budgets and the required recovery ratios. And we have Director Anderson's language now typed up and incorporated in there. We thank Anthony for putting that on. And then 7E is the ordinance authorizing the quarterly capital amendment. Are there any questions that we haven't covered? Yes, Director
Mr.
Hobson.
Chairman, I'd like to pull 7C and vote on that separately.
Sure. So let's do, can I have a motion then on that we approve 7A, 7B, 7D, and 7E? We'll come back and do 7C in a separate roll call, seconded by Director Melvin. So
I'm sorry, who made the motion to approve?
Director Melvin, seconded by Director Pang. So it's 7A, B, D, and E, Madam Secretary. Any questions on those? If not, is there a leave for the attendance roll call on those?
Leave.
Seeing no objection, A, B, D, and E in item 7 are approved. Now, on 7C.
15 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. 7C is the ordinance adopting the reforecasting of the 2017 funding allocations. Comments or questions on that one? Yes, Director Hobson.
The requirement was for them to get back to us in 60 days. I think that that's unnecessary. They've known about this for months. As B indicated, they've already been enacting it. I certainly think they can get back to us by the next board meeting. So I would like to amend it that they are required to get back to us by the next board meeting.
Comments?
Can I just add that
Sure.
the next board meeting is basically 2.5 weeks away?
Director Mel.
I guess I don't even know how to think about it because I don't know what's entailed. So that's I don't know how to ask the question. If you can give us some idea of what.
As I discussed at the finance committee meeting, there's quite a bit of work. I mean, they're trying to plug $94 million holes. Some have more work than others. And they requested the additional time so they could explore all their options. They could run it by their boards, determine how they're going to plug the hole. And as we said, they're already doing some of that, but this is more significant. So they requested the additional 30 days, which is why staff recommends that we give them the 60 days to do it in. That was why.
It just seems to me these are extraordinary times, and maybe that's not unreasonable.
Right. Director McGallis.
The concern, I guess that Director Hobson said, I mean, I had the same concern, and I guess in reaching out to B to talk about that, certainly I would hope in the future we wouldn't do two things. One, give 60 days like this, but also the moving up that month really has affected the public hearings. It's created some problems. I think we need to rethink it. But the situation we had at this point was that through staff meetings with the service boards, they all agreed to that 60 days. And so even though I was hoping that we could have gotten that sooner, I think right now that's what the schedule is. That's what they're anticipating. And I would hope in the future that those commitments are not made without us being more involved in them. So I would hope that you could understand this year, but next year we have a better process for handling delays like that, because it puts us, not the 60 days right now so much, because that's dealing with 17, but that month that we all voted on to extend put us in a kind of a box this year. So my recommendation would be to leave it as it is because of the commitment that our staff made, and that's the way they've been working throughout the service boards.
Thank you, Director McGallis. And what we have before you is our agreement, right, subject to your approval. So we always make that clear, subject to our board's approval. But yes, they requested the time, and I understand why they need it. I mean, this is a big hole to fill, so.
All right. Based on Director McGallis's comments, I will withdraw my motion.
Thank you. Although,
Thank you.
Blake, your comments are very well taken. Before we take the roll call on 7C, I want to personally thank B. You put in extraordinary amounts of hours, and you have more patience than I do sometimes, and your negotiating skills are first rate. And Leanne, Jill, Doug, Bill, all of you, the entire staff, Jeremy, Nadine, thank you. I mean, this is not easy stuff. This is very heavy lifting, both financially as well as just the tact to deal with 3 service boards, and I can't thank you enough. So with that, can I have a motion and a second on 7C? Director McGallis moves we adopt ordinance 7C, seconded by Director Anderson. Thank you, Anthony. Is there leave for the attendance roll call on 7C? Seeing no objection, leave is granted, and
15
7C
ayes
is
and 1
adopted.
absent.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Item 8 is the approval of contract and expenditure items as they appear on the board agenda. Our first one is our state consulting services which I believe it's the same team with the identical amounts of last year, no increase. An ordinance authorizing a contract for transit-oriented development plan implementation. 8C is an ordinance authorizing task order contracts for community planning programs. 8D is authorizing a contract amendment for the transit signal priority program management and systems engineering. And 8E is the new travel expense reimbursement requirements that they come before the board. Any questions on those? If not, can I have a motion?
I do have a
Yes,
question.
Blake.
I wanted to ask about the community planning program. I mean, how is it actually different? It seems very similar to the transit-oriented development, and so I was hoping for some clarification on that, please.
Are you asking the difference between the two contracts?
No, well, TOD, I understand what TOD is, but this community planning program, it sounds a lot like it's TOD.
It is. So community planning program is kind of the overall program, and we do a lot of TOD studies within that community planning program. So when we refer to the community planning program, that's kind of the overall umbrella to that.
So what is then the difference between the two contracts?
Okay, so the first contract for the TOD plan implementation, that's a small contract to ULI, Urban Land Institute, which is made up of mostly, it's a membership association, does nonprofit research. And that is for them to do developer panels as part of our community planning program. So that is, we've done 15 or so since 2012. That's just one of the items that we offer for technical assistance through communities. The other contract is a larger contract where we're employing consulting firms to help with more probably TOD plans, access to transit programs, kind of larger scale planning programs. So the first one's kind of for smaller focused, mostly parcel or corridor based projects, and then the other one is for longer planning studies.
And in the community planning program contract, it was, what was it, 4.8 over 4 years?
Yes.
And what is the RTA portion of that 4.8?
Let me check on this really quick. So it's $4.5 million.
Okay.
It's if you approve this, it's the authorization to spend up to $4.5 million over 4 years, and the RTA contribution is 60% of that, of those funds,
Okay.
and the other 40% is federal funds that we're leveraging.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, Director Lewis.
This is more of a comment, and Leigh and I talked about this a little bit. I would hope that we are coordinating with other agencies who are doing like activities so that we're getting the most efficient use of our dollars. For example, I know the county is doing certain TOD studies, and they've got an activity list. So I would just make a statement, and I'm sure we probably do, but just to make sure we're being as efficient and as effective as we can be in terms of coordinating with other agencies that might be doing similar things in communities that we've got, activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Director Lewis. We do this call for projects for community program jointly with CMAP. And then, as your example with Cook County, we reviewed all of their applications as well. So there's a lot of, we try to coordinate the technical assistance around the region as much as possible.
Super, thank you. So can I have a motion on the items in 8 for adoption? Director Lewis moves that all of the ordinances in item 8 be approved, seconded by Director Douglas Trione. Is there leave for the attendance roll call on these? Seeing no objection, leave is granted. Thank
15
you.
ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Item 9 is new business. Any new business to come before the board? Director McGillis, you have any new
I just
business?
wanted to say a quick comment. Audrey had sent us all the notice that Donna Anderson died, and Donna was really a tremendous person, one of the nicest people you could ever meet, and she was at these meetings, and I used to always see her back there, and I had an opportunity to work with her during the years, and she was way too young to die, and I'm just sorry that for the loss that for her family and everybody.
I mean, that is well taken. Thank you so much. We will miss Donna, and she was superb, just both substantively and as a person, so we will miss her very, very much. I do want to thank Director McGillis under new business for the effort he put into this. Ike was here. As B said, she had new bonding time with Director McGallis, but Ike's not only technical expertise, but his history, even to old guys like me, his history and the way he remembers previous negotiations is invaluable to all of us. And Director McGallis, thank you so much for your hard work here, and you got a lot more work coming your way too. But thank you. Now we need to go into a quick executive session, and unlike other executive sessions, we're going to come back here very quickly for additional work. So we're going to come back in here after executive session. And Nadine, want to remind us why we can go into an executive session?
Yes, if the board would vote to move to executive session pursuant to sections 2C11 and 2C21 of the Open Meetings Act, we can then proceed to discuss litigation and review of prior closed session minutes.
Great, thank you. So can we move into all those in favor?
We need a
signify
motion.
We have it's moved by Director Fuentes, seconded by Director Durrani, that we resolve ourselves into executive session. We'll come back. For those of you who have to leave, both the audience as well as the members, I want to remind you that our next scheduled meeting is Thursday, September 14th. So September 14th, a mere 2.5 weeks away, starting with committees at 8:30 and followed by a regular board meeting. So Nadine, lead us into executive session, and we shall return for further action out here.
Is that
Thank
on a
you.
voice vote that we're moving?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Jim Buchanan.
I've left the conference.
So,
Fun.
did we do the strategic plan before? Or is it's required that we have to have them do it?
It's the last thing on the agenda.
Oh,
Just a strategic plan update. They do good work.
oh, yeah, they do. Sounds great. For some staging this week.
Look forward to it. Blake, did you have a briefcase here? I didn't know we're coming back.
Quickly.
Thank you, everyone. Want to keep us moving. We have returned from our executive session, and I want to call the meeting back to order. Item 11 today is the item coming out of the executive session, and this is the report on the closed docket review, which is required to be done in open session. And Allison, why don't you report on the item coming out of the closed session?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. The board met in executive session earlier today to review the closed meeting minutes. In accordance with the Open Meetings Act, public bodies are required to review prior closed meeting minutes periodically to determine whether a need for confidentiality exists with respect to all or part of the minutes. Based on the review, the board reached consensus that there are no changes to the status of the currently closed minutes, and they should remain closed to inspection by the public, as a need for confidentiality still exists. The board will continue to review these minutes to determine whether any changes in circumstance indicate that they may be made available for review.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will take that as it was reported. Next is item 12, and that's our strategic plan board update by Jill Leary. Jill?
Hi, nearly good afternoon. So this is the second part of input that we're seeking from you guys as the board members for our regional transit strategic plan. And I think hopefully as part of today's kind of lively board discussion, this is the opportunity to, as Director Anderson was saying, to rethink things. This is really what we think our effort is to do that. So before I kind of dive into it, I think we're going to do some polling again as we did on the first one. Did everyone get that up and going? Okay, I'm seeing nods. So. Okay, cool. So we'll be using that in a bit. So in February, we came to you with a set of technical findings and asked for your feedback on our policy directions. After that, we had similar conversations with several other groups, including the Service Board Executive Directors, the CMAP Policy Committee, and about 45 agency stakeholders at an event that we organized. We have used all that feedback, and we received to develop a set of policy statements, a refreshed vision, and a new set of goals that we will share with you today. We also want to have an interactive discussion about how we can go about pursuing the new goals as we look to go ahead and write the plan itself. And as I said, we'll be using that web-based polling when we get to that point. You'll recall that the 2008 RTA Act specified that RTA would create and adopt a strategic plan every 5 years. We see this process as an opportunity to set joint goals. The core of what we do as transit agencies, ensuring safety, security, accessibility, and compliance for the public and our employees, are values that we take very seriously and must address without debate. We are not using the strategic plan to talk about these non-negotiables. Instead, we are using this year's plan development cycle to talk about the key issues that are ripe for discussion, where we need buy-in and support from our stakeholders in order to make informed trade-offs to change circumstances out of our control. These issues include capital funding shortfalls, limited resources, and a changing playing field. We are now more than halfway through our development process. We did background research in 2016 and published the Beginning the Discussion report to summarize our findings as we reached out to stakeholders over the spring. We've now begun plan development, and this meeting begins our second round of stakeholder outreach. We will be talking to several groups over the next month, and again using the feedback we received to finalize the plan's contents. We will present a draft document later this fall as we open the public comment period on the plan. During that time, we will also hold public hearings across the region as required by the Act. We still intend to have a final plan to present you for approval at your January 2018 meeting. Last time we met, we shared with you a series of 9 headlines that describe the state of the region. We asked you and other stakeholders several questions related to these findings and have had many discussions about the direction of the transit system relative to them. We received a wide variety of feedback as summarized in free-form clouds on this slide. There's some key themes that emerged. Stakeholders talked about increasing investment in transit, working towards more sustainable funding for all of our services, improving connections between modes and making improvements in the 5 key geographic areas that we discussed, looking to partnerships for last-mile connections, and continuing to advocate for land use changes that make the best use of the transit system we have. We have turned some of the feedback into 5 policies. These are affirmative statements about the positions on the transit agencies on the big picture issues. I'm going to go ahead and read them one by one right now, and they're also in the handout that you have. So our first policy statement is, transit agencies will support a thriving, resilient region with transit systems that provide attractive, cost-effective travel options and help reduce congestion. The second one, transit agencies will advocate for region-wide policies and pricing strategies that support transit. Our third, transit agencies will continue to control costs and seek opportunities to increase dedicated revenue in order to enhance safety, improve the customer experience, prevent system deterioration, and remain competitive. Our fourth policy statement, transit agencies will focus limited resources on making targeted improvements and increasing transit speeds in multimodal corridors in order to connect and strengthen communities. In our fifth and final policy statement, transit agencies will adapt to the future by applying best practices to our operations, partnering with roadway agencies to prioritize transit, and piloting new technology and mobility solutions. The 5 policy statements serve to inform the vision and goals, which we will go through and discuss one by one now. They are also printed at your table on that same handout. Okay, so from this point forward, we'll be doing some interactive polling questions as part of our discussion. As with last time, the polling is anonymous and meant to capture a lot of input simultaneously. We hope that you will participate in this electric content and also just speak up with your feedback as we go. We'll pause for a moment for everyone to get their device up and going. So everybody seems like they're good to go. Okay, so with that, let's move on to discussing our vision. During the initial round of outreach, we offered several words and concepts related to our vision for the transit system: world-class, resilient, modern, and affordable. We heard from our stakeholders that the transit system should be all of the above, and that the combination of those elements are important, but that none in particular stood out. We also heard that we should think about how the transit system can offer something else that makes it appealing and competitive. And we heard that transit investment really is important for a variety of practical reasons that we should acknowledge, including maintaining a system that bolsters the region's competitiveness, inducing ridership by everyone, which supports more service for disadvantaged populations, and managing congestion and the harmful externalities of auto use. We put our heads together with our service board colleagues and developed a new vision that is the following: convenient, reliable, and affordable public transit as the core of the Chicago region's robust transportation mobility network. This vision will continue to evolve as we share it with stakeholders, but we felt this captured the feedback we received to put a fresh spin on what we were doing while also remaining very practical about the purpose of the transit system. Okay, so we'll pause here to ask, how does this vision satisfy your expectations for our transit system? So this is your first polling question, so this should come up on your device here. So select the leftmost circle if you feel this vision is lacking, the rightmost if you feel it is complete, or somewhere in between. You can kind of just drop a pin where your sense is. Looks like some votes are coming in. Okay, it's trending more towards people are satisfied with this. Does anybody have any comments for the middle, I guess the middle of the ground feelings on that of feedback on the vision? Yep.
My first read of it, it didn't strike me as forward-looking.
Okay.
So things are changing, and we're talking about it largely the way we've always talked about it. And so as things have changed and the evolution of transportation has changed, so should our vision. And so to me, as opposed to fighting the changes, figure out a way to embrace it and work it in.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think it was good. I covered it. But the one thing, this is the first time I've ever voted in Chicago, and there's only 10 votes so it's actually under the total that it could have been. Yeah, I'm amazed.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah. Any other feedback? Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Jessica then.
Sure. So with that vision in mind, then we then turned our attention to goals. And there were sort of three categories of discussion that emerged as we talked through things with our stakeholders. And we've turned them each into a goal, which we will now go through one by one. The first category of discussion was funding. Surprise, surprise, the most popular theme of today as well. It was a huge topic in all of our stakeholder meetings. And we heard from people that most stakeholders do indeed support more funding for transit, which could be somewhat surprising and is a good thing for us, I think, given what we were talking about earlier. We also heard from folks that we should continue to control our spending and be conservative, but not focus primarily on a low-cost service. I think everybody recognized the need to spend some to get some, and that we could really look to any kind of new funding to do that, that there wasn't a particular source of funding or a particular tax that stood out above others, but that kind of any new funding would be helpful to us. So as we talked about these things that we heard with our stakeholder group and with our service board colleagues, we realized that we were really talking about investment language, and we really needed to think about our services as an investment that our taxpayers were making, that riders were making, that all of you were making, and that you really needed to see a return on that investment. So with that in mind, our first goal is to deliver value on our investment. This is about delivering value both on the investment that we already have, but also looking to increase that investment, both to stabilize our operations, as we talked about earlier, and also to increase our capital funding, as we talked about in the past, hopefully to double the level we have now. So thinking about your role as investors, both in terms of the taxes you pay as residents of the region, as well as your roles as RTA board members, what kinds of things would you be willing to do to help us reach our investment goals, particularly our capital investment goals? So for this poll and this discussion, we wanted to get an idea, get some feedback on what kind of the things that come out as what people are willing to do. So you can actually rank them on your screen. You'll see them listed before you. You can press down on them on the right side and drag the thing you're most willing to do to the top. So if you're most willing to pay higher fares, then you drag that to the top, and keep doing that until you have them ranked as you would see them, and then hit submit. Make sure to hit that submit button at the end, and then we can talk a little bit about what we see. Starting to get in some responses. Okay, we see a few more coming in. Again, make sure to hit submit. So you have to press down very hard on the right to drag them up. I'm particularly challenged with this one whenever I try to do it. Right, so it looks like higher fares are rising to the top as the thing that folks would be most willing to do. Beyond that, advocating or contributing some funding that you have access to. And then taxes kind of fall to the bottom of that. Does anybody want to talk about their thoughts on that and how that, I guess, would be relevant considering what we were talking about earlier? So folks are still working on the polling.
I put
Make sure.
advocating for funding increases is most important, only because that's the part of the process we have the least control over. We have no option but to, if we don't go after it, somebody else will.
Okay, so to push for it.
We just spent 3.5 hours talking about exactly that, dealing with issues that are totally out of our control. And yet the money's there and going somewhere else. We're the victims of a subjective process, or a politically subjective process.
Other thoughts on that? Now we're seeing more responses come in. It looks like higher fares are still at the top of that, and paying higher taxes are still at the bottom. So other thoughts? Please do make sure to use your mics as well, since we still are on the online streaming.
Thank you.
And the recording. Sure. No other thoughts? Still voting. All right, well, I think we Yeah, it's not really changing the outcome. So why don't we move on to a second and very related question, which is that we heard from a lot of people that we need to be more clear about why we need more funding, and if we get more funding, what we're going to do with it. So especially Metro riders who experience those on-time rides, they really don't understand why Metro is having a financial crisis. So we wanted to talk to you about that. How do you think that we could more clearly communicate our need for additional funding and our plans for using that funding? For this polling is actually free-form, so you'll see a space on your screen where you can enter in any idea that you have, and it'll show up on the screen. But we're looking for ideas. Is it meeting more with our elected officials? Is it working more with the media? Is it more online presence? What can we really do to tell people that transit funding is important and that we need more of it?
Didn't we hear the people at Metro talk a little bit about some of the older cars and stuff like that, how they've been around since Eisenhower's time or something like that?
Right.
You know, my friends who feel free to share their opinion about the Metro increases with me, don't really know that story.
Mm.
They use Metro every day and don't know anything about that. So somehow that message has been lost.
So somehow letting the riders themselves know what the state of what they're riding in is, which they may not notice.
I think so. I mean, the questions are, how come you raise my fees? What are we getting for this? How come, you know, that whole thing. Right? And I say, well, you got riding on cars from the Eisenhower era, and they're like, no, really? Is it? You know, they don't know how bad it is, and so I think just getting the message out to the riders themselves might be the most important thing. I don't know.
Interesting. We're also seeing some other ideas come up, more lobbying, engaging the business community. Does anybody want to talk about how we might tell the business community about the need? Oh, a full sentence, yes. Social media and other kinds of campaigns.
You know, on the business community, Jessica and Susan's back there, maybe we do a little survey of what each of the major business groups, Chicagoland Chamber, State Chamber, the Illinois Manufacturers Association, retail merchants is critical, and ask for space in their magazines to do an op-ed as to why it's critical for them and for employers. Including the business, including the business, wrong.
You're voted
But
on there.
including the business owners and management, there's an association of downtown business owners of buildings, and I think we need to see what we can do with that organization to get the word out to all these people that work in the central business district and own property down here and employ people. BOMA, I think, is what it's called.
Interesting. That's a good idea. And we're getting a few more ideas out here. A lot about media. Who have we done this?
Survey, where are we getting this information from that we've gotten today?
From our first round of stakeholder outreach. That was meeting with all of you first, and then we talked with the policy committee at the MPO, basically at CMAP, leaders of all the transportation agencies. We invited in a group of stakeholders, which is about 45 other entities in the region who came in and gave us their thoughts on it.
When you say entities, what?
Transportation, mostly transportation agencies, so
But counties,
highways, counties.
local government.
Yeah.
So you haven't talked to the people that use it?
That's next.
When that is next?
Well, we've been live on the website. We've had web interaction too, and then we go more public after this.
Right, yeah. Our strategic plan is focused on kind of this 5-year period, so we're coordinating a lot with the service boards as well. The public face, I think is what you're getting at, Director Anderson, the public facing and the questions. We haven't directly done that. We are partnering with CMAP, who's doing their long-range plan, and they're having a series of different meetings over the summer where we'll also get feedback that we can incorporate into it.
Good question, though. I don't know. I'm not. Yeah. Good question. Hashtag free RTA. Would anybody like to share that?
Someone wants to free us? I'm not sure what that means.
Free us from or to what? I'm not sure. But Why don't we move on to talking about accountability now? So we know that it's one thing to tell people how we want to use the funding, and it's another thing to actually show them that we did use the funding and it resulted in something. So what would demonstrate to you that investing more in transit is worthwhile? Here we're getting at what kind of outcomes would you like to see at the end of it, right? Is it more ridership? The kind of tangible things that we can count? Is it just faster and more reliable service so the people that you're talking to, or you, if you're a rider, notice that you're getting more for your money? Is it newer infrastructure so that those Eisenhower era cars feel better, look better, smell better, whatever it is? Is it more local development, more local signs like development itself around transit, or improvements at the station area and crosswalks and things like that? Or is it really more a matter of agency financial stability and our ability to come to you each month and tell you that we're in a good financial place rather than a struggling one? You know, what do you want to see? Here you can kind of vote. Looks like people have already realized that. Looks like ridership above and beyond all things is really what we want to see, or what you want to see. Behind that is the self-interest, I guess, what I usually call the self-interest, which is faster and more reliable service. Would anybody like to talk about either of those, either why ridership is so important or why we want to be able to show some of these other changes after we've received funding or as a result of the funding?
I mean, just a logical thing, if you were a legislator, is why should we give you more money when your ridership is down? I mean, that's a pretty simple question.
Other thoughts? So what about the counter argument to that we hear, which is that if we are not investing, we talked about it earlier, I think you might have mentioned it, if we aren't investing, then we actually cause a ridership decline. Do you think folks get that relationship?
They should, but I don't think they do. But it's critical, especially when this group wants higher fares. Most riders will begrudgingly accept higher fares if you show them they're getting better service, more reliable service. Not all, but most. And while low fares, I think we looked at one of these surveys, while low fares is something we always strive for, being the lowest is not necessarily the way to go. We're always worried about affordable fares, but it shouldn't be the end-all, be-all. The cheapest is not always the best.
Other thoughts on that? All right, well, let's move on to the second goal. I'll hand it off to Heather.
So we also heard during our last round of outreach that we should continue to work on the practical aspects of riding transit, which is faster and more reliable buses, better connections, and more modern amenities. And in the era of limited funding in which we operate, we know that this means focusing our efforts on the 5 key areas that we talked about last time, and we will recap those 5 areas for you here. The first is that we highlighted the need for major infrastructure investment to support the Chicago CBD, which is still the region's employment core. We talked about the need for more transit-oriented development in suburban Cook County as demographic groups most likely to use transit continue to grow there. We talked about the need to reduce travel times and provide better connections for South Side commuters. And we also discussed the need for more transit capacity and bus priority for North Side commuters. And finally, we talked about the importance of partnerships in education and making last-mile connections to our suburban job clusters. So based on these findings and the discussions that we had about them, our second goal is build on the strengths of our network. We do have a strong network already, but there is room to improve by focusing our efforts on our strongest performing growing corridors and markets throughout the region. And this would mean channeling investments to make improvements in those 5 key areas. Which leads to our next question. What do you believe to be a transit challenge in these 5 key areas that the plan should address? This is another free-form open response. You can provide up to 3 responses. Your responses can address just one of the 5 areas, or could perhaps cover all of them or a couple of those areas. To recap them real quickly here, the first was the Chicago CBD, second was suburban Cook County, third was the South Side, fourth was the North Side, and 5 were connections to suburban job clusters. Sure.
Is it in the age of Uber and Lyft and all these things, is it worth thinking about how to just facilitate using those services for the last mile stuff and for the suburban campuses, rather than using this large system to try to figure out how to get to all those small places? But
It could be either. We're kind of looking for options of how to really address those issues, because it could be partnering with these TNCs, or it could be expanding our own system or working on land use options. So I think it could be any of those.
In one of the ADA meetings, they talked about the McHenry situation and how they were trying to get some transportation done in McHenry, and I just wondered if maybe the answer wasn't for some organization like the RTA to call up Square and get some sort of arrangement where there was a certain subsidy to anybody who wanted to use Lyft or Uber out to McHenry, and sort of that might be the best use of something.
Yeah, that's definitely an option. I think that's something that could apply to some of the areas here. It's also something we're going to get into more detail later in the presentation and talk specifically about TNCs and how that they can interact with the transit system. Yeah. Okay, we've got some coming in. Rideshare partnerships for last mile service, better coordination with Metro and Pace in the suburbs, making reverse commute easier. CBD and last mile is important. We need to get people to work. Does anyone want to expand on what their answer is here, or have anything else to add? A few more coming in. Another vote for more Metro and Pace coordination.
Oh, while you're doing that, I think the last mile is a key, because that not only gets people at work, but it also gets people on Metro and the CTA.
Yep.
And if you can get them to ride it that last mile, that makes a difference.
Yep.
It helps us with ridership.
Absolutely. Okay, more ride sharing partnerships. Privatizing some Pace routes. Better use of technology. Okay. Good responses. Anything else anyone wants to add? Okay. Move on then. Nope, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing about the reverse commute. With it seems that millennials, and we talk about millennials a lot, they want to live in the urban environment down in the city, but taking myself being the selfish thinker, I've got somebody, my business is out in McHenry, and trying to attract those people, it's difficult, because they're like, well, I don't, how do I get out there? And so in this case, well, they could maybe make it out to Timber Hill. Well, that's still 15 minutes or 20 minutes from my business. And so it becomes a challenge to attract that kind of talent out to jobs lying out in that area. So that's why, because of the millennial generation, I think the reverse commute is something that should be focused on or talked about at the very least.
That's a good point. Okay. Anything else? Good. All right. So one of the other things we heard is that some of our greatest challenges or needs for improvement are out of the transit agency's purview. We don't control it. They involve local and regional decisions by other entities. However, they are important enough that we do want to address them in this plan somehow. So we do have another question here, and that is, how should the transit plan address things that are not in control of transit agencies, such as land use policy, priority lanes, and pricing policies? We recognize that each of these may require a different approach, but we're looking for general feedback on whether to take them on or to leave them for CMAP or other regional or state entities to address. On this question, you can drop a pinpoint on the scale somewhere from the least aggressive on the left to more aggressive on the right to indicate ways that we should address areas outside of our control. It's also important to note that the actions build upon one another, so that if you're voting for the more aggressive actions on the right, it does mean that we're also going after the other three areas. So if you want to push for legislation, we can't really do that without acknowledging, educating, or advocating. All right, it looks like most are going for more aggressive approaches here. The majority on the advocate here. Does anyone want to elaborate on what they voted for? No? Nope. Okay. Okay.
I guess my first thought would be, for any of this stuff, is there a way for me to partner with people to share some benefits that created? And that would be my first choice before I kind of advocate.
Okay. That's a good.
Right, like partnering with IDOT
Yeah.
would be ideal in this.
And just one example of something here that really isn't under our control. If Uber is slowing down our buses on Michigan Avenue, we need to educate the Greater North Michigan Avenue Association and others. And the alderman has commented to me that that Uber gets to basically stop any place, and in terms of where they stop, maybe they need to have certain points of pickup, et cetera. But if they're slowing down our buses, that's a real problem, because when we're talking about convenient, reliable, and fast service, if they're slowing down a major artery like Michigan Avenue with a bunch of Ubers from Northwest Indiana, that's a problem.
Oh, that's a good point. Anything else, or maybe different approaches we can take to address any of these approaches?
Be proactive. I mean, let communities know that if they're doing anywhere they want.
Taxi cabs are much more cautious now, really, because they know coppers will be all over them.
A lot of cities don't even think about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else?
Pickup points.
All right, well, we will hand things off to Peter.
Okay, thank you. So I move into the last category of a conversation with the stakeholders, which is about adaptation. We heard that we should adapt best practices from other agencies and the private sector as we looked at offering better apps and information for customers. That we should protect and improve the speed and convenience of our own services so that it's as competitive as it can be. And that we should continue to look for partnerships with local entities, even mobility companies, when we consider paratransit and local dial-a rides. So our third and final goal is stay competitive. Bus ridership is a transit service mode that seems the most threatened by competition at this time, both in our region and across the country. CTA and PACE bus ridership have been down for a couple of years, and we are all concerned about this trend becoming a long-term issue, as we talked about today. With that in mind, the next polling question is, what can we do to stem off ridership declines, especially on buses? And on this question, we're showing here a cross-section to represent some of the different sorts of alternatives. We'd like you to drop a pinpoint on the phrases that offer the most promise for increasing bus ridership in your view. You can put down up to 3 pinpoints. And again, we're showing here things that cannot, from like on the left, the transit-oriented development, things that are outside of our right-of-way and outside of our direct control development patterns and such, or more things that, and more in the right-of-way, like pedestrian and bus access or bus stop improvements. things that are in more control, like faster services, more comfortable vehicles, better information. So again, you can vote for three choices. So we're seeing mostly within the right-of-way, not too much in terms of development. Faster services, we've been hearing a lot of feedbacks in all these conversations that it's a key point to being competitive. So this is really more focused on things that we and the service boards can do directly. Any
I think comfortable stops is a big point. So, when the weather's bad and you're in the winter, the choice is to call Uber and have them pick you up at your door, or go and wait on the bus stop, right? And there's some benefits to, in my case, walking a block and a half to the bus stop. Bus takes me 10 blocks. Get out and walk 3 more blocks to my job, right? But Uber will take me door to door. And so on a really nasty day, it's the critical thing for me. That's all I'm saying. That's it. And then next would be real-time info to know exactly when that bus is going to be there so I can time my exit to walk out, right? So.
Which you also have in a shared ride.
Right, right.
It's 1 minute from you or.
Right.
And under comfortable vehicle, I put it more for, not the comfort per se, but for people that have the ability to work on the bus. So the chairs are wide enough where they can, have access without bumping into the person if they wanted to text a message or whatever. So I'm looking more for the ability to do work on a bus, per se, on a chair, as opposed to the comfort of the seat. I just want to clarify that. More of a work type station, enough room to do something like that.
No,
That's a good point. I agree with that.
I agree with that too, because particularly, people younger than us are more gizmo-oriented, more tech-oriented in being able to support and complement their tech gear, I think would be an attractive thing.
And then also, they all have backpacks, right? So with the seats, right, you need room for a backpack. It's unlike a briefcase where you put it in your seat. They have it on their back. So just be aware of what type of gear, so to speak, that the commuter wears now.
It's true.
It's very true. We have heard a lot of discussion about the development patterns and that sort of thing. I'm curious why, maybe if someone could respond to why no one put a pinpoint on TOD or those issues.
TOD is, my area is springing up around the rail stations, and so it actually reduces bus ridership. People used to ride the base bus to the station, now live in the apartment building renting to the station. TOD actually depresses bus ridership in my area.
In terms of adding, moving to rail, but yeah.
Well, and I agree with Bill, because when I think of TOD, I'm thinking metro, I'm thinking rail stops.
Okay.
That's exactly what I thought.
Okay.
There are apartments around the train stations, and those are people that used to ride pace.
Okay.
Or maybe they drove. Right? So I guess we don't know all those answers yet. You look in other countries where they have a culture of public transportation. You don't drive your car into London or Paris, and it's fast, it's comfortable, easy transfers, all sort. Even the really old system in London, but you have exactly when the trains are coming. It's reliable, and I think we don't have that kind of culture in the U.S. Maybe in the East Coast you do more than here, but we have to build it.
Okay. All right, thank you. So moving on, we also heard that we should look for opportunities to improve our services by adopting strategies our peers have had success with, or innovations private companies have shown could be promising when adapted to transit. So based on that feedback, we also wanted to ask, in a polling, that will show up. Give us a minute. Well, actually, it's showing up in my, it shows up in my phone. I think you're saying that the question we're going to ask is, so what best practices have you seen elsewhere that agencies here could realistically implement? So this one is going to be a two-step process, a little bit different. When you type in your responses, you're not going to see it come up on the screen immediately. All right, we're going to do some Wizard of Oz thing. Will's going to be behind the scenes and consolidate your answers into a few of the common kind of choices, and then we'll display those, and then we'll ask you to vote or rank those responses. Okay, we're getting it. So you're giving quite a few responses. It'll take a minute to sift them. Oopsies. So while we're finishing up, you can click on the Load New Responses button on the bottom of your screen. So if you click on, again, the kind of orange brownish Load New Responses, the tan bar, you should see the list of these responses with up and down arrows. So we'll ask you to up means that you agree with this option. If you click the down arrow is that you don't support it so much. So only do up or down for one for each of the responses. You'll see a number on the left column that really is a sort of a tallying thing that doesn't really mean much. So what we're showing on the screen though is the tallies of your up and down responses. Actually, the red bar is a positive response, and the grayish bar on the left is a negative response. So again, we're seeing interest in partnering with Uber and TNCs, information, things that make buses faster, express lanes. Not so much women-only cars. Fair collections of a mix.
Got a new
one more added, knowledgeable people who provide information. So it's kind of related to the earlier streetscape with information, faster service. Of course, Union Station comes in here. Better shelters. Okay. Good, that's helpful. Any discussion or comments anyone like to add?
I love the integration with Uber, except for we have to think underlying what makes that so popular and see if there's a way to take the ideas without creating this congestion, because if you're coming down, it's created more congestion in the central business district without a doubt. And it kind of undermines our I think it's undermining our core responsibility. And so that kind of confuses me. It's more looking at the convenience and you know, getting you point to point better. The price matters with it too, but not always. But you know, I think it does because you know, if it gets rainy in the city or something's bad with the CTA in the city, you'll take an Uber, but I bet that happens less with Metro if you're having a $40 or $50 or $60 ride to get in an Uber. So price matters, but it's just the convenience, and I just feel we have to be very careful about those.
Well, that goes into directly our last actually little discussion point.
I just wanted to add, I agree with that. I think, you know, Uber type service has a place when it comes to ride share, but I don't think it's a core function of, you know, our service lines and providing rides for single
and
individuals.
maybe for paratransit, and there's something really possible there, and for ADA. Because today I don't think we provide a service that's always reliable, which is not good. And
well, we did talk a lot with our stakeholders about the private mobility services, including the TNCs, Lyft, and Uber, but also the other sorts of companies like Via, Chariot, and taxi cabs. And we have come to the conclusion, as you've been saying, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for how we can work with them without threatening transit service. That said, we are committed to developing a policy that can guide our steps moving forward across different modes and parts of the region. On some of our most costly modes, such as PACE, ADA paratransit, and local daily ride services, private services may also be able to provide complementary services that are more convenient for customers and cheaper to operate. PACE already contracts with some taxi cab companies to provide service, and the MBTA has partnered with Uber and Lyft in Boston to pilot on-demand parallel service to their ADA-eligible customers in addition to the ADA paratransit. And in lower density suburban areas that are challenging to serve with traditional mass transit, private services could provide innovative solutions for a car-free or car-light lifestyle. But in those long-haul corridors where Metro and some of PACE Express services operate, private services can provide first and last mile access, but not directly competing due to on the line haul as part of the trip due to their high cost of this TNC service for those kinds of long trips over congested expressways. And in those areas, we may want to partner with them for feeder services, as we have been doing in DuPage County, as Metro intends to do with their Uber marketing partnership. But meanwhile, direct competition in the densest areas like the Chicago CBD and North Side could cause a vicious cycle of decline in transit ridership, in which more cars and curbside passenger loadings further reduce bus speeds. This would lead to congested streets, potential service cuts, or subsidy increases as transit reliability issues lead to further ridership loss. And in those areas, we may want to look to regulate or even tax private services. So different mixes across the region of transit modes, land use environments, and local market conditions will require our transit agencies to have different approaches toward private mobility services. Kind of a long way to say what you just said. So with that in mind, we have one more question. What should a region-wide policy on private mobility services include in order to ensure that they support transit growth? This one, another one is open-ended questions. We just type in some thoughts, and we'll you have that for our discussion. Okay, so yeah, the last mile issues on the pickup and drop off regulations. There has been some kind of voluntary cooperation. I think with like at the airports where there are designated pickup spots for Uber and Lyft, but it may be time to put a little bit more force behind that. Again, trying to leverage the applications for last mile, first mile. Peak fare pricing is perhaps an option. Right. Yeah, CTA just implemented a thing that we actually, UI Labs had talked to us. We were part of some development, some ideas, and that you may have heard with the Wrigley Field. They were offering some incentives to stay away from the red line if you're not going to Wrigley Field, and you use another interchange your time of pattern. And the idea of that was could help to understand kind of what the value of and what sort of incentives would be needed to get people to really shift their patterns to take better use of the existing capacity, move from the congested red line to if a parallel bus route has capacity to move people across that way, and then perhaps an RFP perhaps to look to maybe look at this more rigorously. Any other discussion points?
I think Chris's idea on the demand pricing is a good one. I mean, my barber charges more on Saturdays than he does on Fridays because he's crammed on Saturdays and he wants to shift people to other days. And so if we can, and we have in our transportation system a lot of, I'll call off-peak hours that things are riding around empty. And if we can shift people from the high demand times to lower demand times, that would certainly benefit and or reap more revenue during the peak hours.
You know, I'm in a very competitive industry, and you know, I never like to promote a competitor. And I think what we're getting a fine line here of promoting these outside services as opposed to our main line. And the more and more we do this, the more and more people are going to look at it and say, you know what, for the extra bucks more, I don't have to wait for the bus. I don't have to, I'm in a seat now. I know the driver. I'm comfortable with the driver. I think what we're doing is really helping them sell their services as opposed to building ours. And I think that's what we have to be very, very careful about. When you go to Union Station now and they have special stops for Uber or whatever, guess what? They're going to go there as opposed to wait for the bus. So now we're going to lose bus ridership even more. And it's more and more cost effective because they have more of them going out. And I was at a meeting by Google and Facebook, which have, and we were just discussing Deloitte. 4 o'clock when they're all ready to go, you can't even move down the street because all the Uber cars are blocking the street. So even the buses can't get through. So I think we have to be very careful with how we use these private services because I think we're getting into an area where we really don't want to go.
So stay competitive.
Absolutely.
I agree. Our goal should be to attract new riders, more riders to public transportation, and I think that happens through all the things we've discussed. You know, reliability, you know, reasonable fares, convenience, and we haven't addressed some of the barriers yet, which are those last miles is a big part of it. And, you know, I got on the train the other day and there was a moldy sandwich on my seat, you know, and it you know, that kind of stuff, I don't know, maybe you see, I lived in DC for a long time and that just never happened, but I don't know, and one thing we haven't brought up that I have been more concerned about than ever before is safety. You know, and there's kind of been a shift in a lot of people I know that won't ride the train home after X time, and that never used to happen. So I saw that there was a safety cut in one of the capital plans by, you know, part of it was on safety. I'm sure that they're not jeopardizing safety, but, you know. Physical safety. No, not the safety of the equipment. Yes, I mean, there's whether the statistics bear it out, there's a psychological effect happening by all the, you know, the coverage.
Yeah, Uber works better in the suburbs of the train stations than it does in the city, in terms of our interaction.
You know, this is one where it would be the right conversation with the city council and the mayor to think about congestion. We've always been battling congestion. Now we're embracing Uber, and it's really making it very difficult.
Okay. Thanks for all these comments. I think just kind of bookending this last thing, that's really why we want to try to create this region-wide policy, because the circumstance and the options are varying all over the region. So kind of just putting some more boundaries on things, I think, will help advance the conversation. So thank you. Thanks for everyone's comments and patience. I just want to give one more ask. If anybody has any more comments on the vision or the goals or the policy statements, feel free to reach out to us. Next steps include, so Chairman Dillard and Leanne will be going to all three service boards to present in September. Not specifically this presentation, but just kind of engage them on our strategic plan efforts. We've been working very closely with service board staff, but this will be a good opportunity for them to speak to their boards. We're also going to have a similar stakeholder outreach meeting in September. So, and then we'll be back with you in the fall with the full plan that we'll be opening for public comment and your comment as well. But this is kind of the nuts and bolts of it, right? As we're kind of concentrating all of our efforts in these kind of three goals because we think it's a good framing device to try to help us move forward. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but really thank you for your time and patience.
Good job.
Thank you very much. Can I have a motion to adjourn in a second?
So moved.
It's been moved by Director Fuentes, seconded by Director Pang, that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And thank you, everybody, for today.